Hyperrings are detachable modules used by ships to travel greater distances faster than light speed, but due to their added weight, they're left behind when combat takes place or when landing on a planet. So could a hyperring work in Kerbal space program? Let's find out. For this experiment, I built in KSP a hyperring spaceship with present-day technology. The ring is powered by 2 nuclear reactor engines and carries a 20-ton spaceship. Big disclaimer, this ring does not go faster than light speed. To test its effectiveness, we will travel to a distant planet to explore its secrets, and also because this is the final mission of our 3 flights career mode speedrun. And here we have takeoff. Why does this spaceship look so weird, you may be asking? Well, I put jet engines on it. But why would you put jet engines on a spacecraft? Well, you see, I didn't have every item unlocked yet in the tech tree, and the Panther jets, 16 of them, do just fine. And then I have a second stage. The second stage is composed by 2 rocket boosters that I'm about to ignite right now. Each rocket booster has 4 Cheetah rocket engines. They're very efficient, and for this reason, they will almost entirely carry us to orbit. Now, while we get to space, let me explain why I designed the hyperring stage. The hyperring actually comes out of necessity, because I needed a transfer stage that could bring a 20-ton spacecraft from the low orbit of Kerbal to Laythe and back. Now, what is the advantage of this transfer stage compared to a traditional one? A traditional one would be attached on the back of the plane, and that would alter our center of mass, and we would lose the aerodynamic control that the plane has. This one instead is attached underneath with a docking port, and so the center of mass doesn't really move on the plane itself, and for this reason we're not flipping over, we are not losing control right now, we're perfectly fine, we're just flying, coasting to space. And this is an advantage for later on when we re-enter the atmosphere of Laythe. We want to do an aerobraking maneuver, and it works like the fins on a military bomb. They stabilize us, and it contains a lot of fuel, it can carry cargo if you dock to it, and I think overall it's quite a small solution that gives you a lot of delta V out of it, and now we have reached orbit. So for those who are wondering, I'm using visual mods, and most are free. I'm using True Volumetric Clouds, which is the only non-free mod there is, but it's still definitely worth it in my opinion, like $4. I'm using for the shiny bits on the plane, I'm using Textures Unlimited Recoloring Depot, or TURD. And yeah, I made a whole video about my favorite visual mods about a year ago, so definitely check that one out. It's not outdated, so it should work good for you. Right now, we're using the Transfer Window Planner mod, so we input our destination, and it shows us when is the optimal time for a transfer maneuver to save delta V, and it also shows us that's about 1800 meters per second delta V, so that's quite efficient. It shows us the angles of the planets, like a clock, so that helps us to visualize our destination better. And if we zoom back into Kerbal, we can also see the ejection angle that we need to use to plot our maneuver, and that is really useful, right? Because our maneuvers will be better, will be sort of cleaner, and save us some delta V as well. And now I'm doing a smaller burn because I want to reduce my inclination as much as possible, so that later on my approach to Jool will be as equatorial and clean as possible again. Now, as you can see here, I've done 2 separate burns instead of a single one, and the reason is that with 1800 meters per second, it's just more efficient to split in 2 burns, because we don't have a very high thrust to weight ratio, so they're quite long, even though we have 3 engines lit up. The second reason is that with a single burn, our starting point would be so far from the maneuver node itself that we would have to burn very early on. And that would send us into the atmosphere, paradoxically. So we would just burn and crash and die, and we don't want that to happen. So that's a big reason. I think many players know this at this point, it's quite common knowledge, but you want to keep that in mind when you're doing when using nuclear engines that have this sort of quirk. And oh man, I love the views. These visual mods are amazing. For one last time, we get to see our home planet. It's important here to collect science because this is a science speedrun essentially. Now, thanks to Tylo, as you can see here, we adjust our entry into the Julian system. Tylo will help us to slow down and save some fuel with the flyby. We collect science around the sun before entering the Julian system, where again, we collect science. This will happen a lot. This will get very common throughout this whole video, because we need at least 10,000 science points to fill up and complete the tech tree of the career mode in KSP. Because remember, we're trying to use just 3 flights to complete the entire game. And as you can see again, we are doing some more burns, a second Tylo flyby to lower further our orbit. It's important because we are going to save a lot of fuel by constantly doing these swing bys, you know, using gravity assists to slow down. Throughout all of these burns, we also want to keep our inclination always very low, because it's easy to get orbits out of control if you don't ever adjust your inclination back to 0. And here I thought I could get a good intercept of Laythe. I was very wrong. I still had too much speed and I got cooked. Yeah, these parts are not very heat tolerant. And so I went for a different strategy this time. I was hoping it wouldn't die, and I went for an intercept, a flyby with Vol, which is the moon between Tylo and Laythe. And the idea was that it could slow me down, so next time I fly through Laythe's atmosphere, I don't burn like a crisp immediately. And we did some science on Laythe. I think it looks pretty unique. Like, these mountain ridges remind me a bit of a bigger version of Minmus. But I've never been on Laythe, so let me know, guys, if it's actually worth exploring, because I don't know, I never thought about it, but it looks pretty interesting. And we went for a flyby on Laythe. We didn't go in the atmosphere, we just did some science and appreciated the sunset. And this flyby is just to slow us down even further, as you can see here. And yeah, I went for another intercept, this time through the atmosphere, and I really prayed that I wouldn't burn like I did the previous time. And as I found out, quite the opposite happened. So we were a bit too high, so we did heat a bit up, but not enough to slow us down. And yeah, so I had to reload the quick save. This time I pushed my periapsis lower by 1 kilometer, and I found out it makes a big difference. It's a bit more risky, you can overheat more. I spun out of control, that was a bit crazy, I was freaking out. I thought things were getting out of control, but the ring was meant to keep us stable, but it wasn't doing its job. But we survived, so yeah, got this nice orbit, finally. So then I proceeded to do other 4 air brake maneuvers. And of course, you know, once you've done the first one, you survive the next because they're slower. It's more that I'm using Mark 1 parts, which are the lightest in the game, but they're also the most vulnerable to heat. So it's just that the game is very well balanced in this sense. And there's no right or wrong way to build a space plane for Laythe. It's just you have to be very careful. Raising our periapsis back into space so that we can find ourselves in a lovely parking orbit above this planet. Now, as a general rule of thumb, I always want to land on the day side of a planet, so for this reason I did my deorbit burn on the night side. So sorry if you couldn't see much there. Now, let's appreciate how beautiful this sunrise looks. And I think I really want to thank the creators of the visual mods that today make Kerbal Space Program look better than ever. I'm really thankful for this community, honestly. Now, why am I flying sideways? Why am I knife edging this aircraft at hypersonic speeds? Well, it's because I want to turn left to reach Crescent Bay, which is a biome, which is our also destination of this mission. And it's located quite north, and we came from an equatorial orbit. Now let's talk about Laythe's atmosphere, because I don't think many know these facts. Laythe's atmosphere is pretty interesting. At sea level, it's thinner than the one on Kerbal, just 60% of the density. But above 12 kilometers, something happens. There's a reversal. The atmosphere on Laythe becomes thicker than the one on Kerbal at these high altitudes. As you can see here, I'm gliding at the edge of space without too many issues. And the reason is physics. And physics tells us that when the gravity of a planet is weaker, like on Laythe, the air molecules of the atmosphere around it are compressed less at sea level, and they're more free to move around and mix at high altitudes, and so we get a more homogeneous density overall, which allows for a denser atmosphere at high altitudes. But now let's focus on landing. This is quite dangerous. We're at 5 kilometers high, and these jet engines for some reason still manage to keep us in the air. I was quite surprised. I dodged this tree, if that's even a tree, I don't know. I was modulating the afterburners so I could get a decent approach, which was good enough, but wow, that was a hard landing. Man, these engines were moving. It was like a Ryanair landing, but overall we've landed. It was one of the most beautiful re-entry patterns I think I've ever flown in this game. So of course the first thing I did on landing was plant proudly our flag on the peaks of Laythe. Then I went with some science. I needed to get the data out of this biome. It was really important. I played some golf, of course. I love the animation. I think they should have done more of these deployed science-y things. And my first takeoff attempt was not so good. It really wasn't looking good, so I tried again. I went with a more traditional takeoff approach, only to hit the only mushroom tree in the radius of probably 1 kilometer. So this was really annoying. So I decided to use the hill itself as my ramp for taking off. And this time it worked really well, so I couldn't really complain. It was more just that I had to learn what ways work and what ways don't. Then I had to go in the next biome, the biome of the dunes. The dunes is a biome on Laythe found at altitudes that are intermediate between the peaks, usually found at much higher elevations, and the shores, which of course are down at the beach. So I did my science, played some golf again, only to later find out that this particular science deployed experiment is not even sensitive to the biome you're doing it. So once you do it on a planet, you don't have to do it for every single biome. Either way, I think it looks amazing. Then I went hunting for some geysers. I really wanted to scan one with my scanning arm, and this one caught my attention. So I did this U-turn and switched to VTOL configuration and tried for a smoother landing than the previous one I did. Now obviously the denser air helped in my favor this time, and I mean it wasn't the smoothest, but it was already an improvement, I think. And then I discovered a really big issue. The slope made my aircraft always slip off. Even with the gear closed or open, it didn't change, and I couldn't scan that geyser. I was really frustrated, I was losing my patience, so I found another geyser, and this time I was hoping that I could nail this landing a bit more smooth. I mean, it's not smooth, but it's smoother, so I mean, come on. I'm making some improvement there, guys. Either way, I found this geyser, and after some challenging approaching procedures, I was able to scan it. I was really happy, but I learned the lesson, you know. I have to place the scanning arm in a much more convenient position the next time. Then out of boredom, I decided to climb inside the geyser and see if it actually blows me in the air. It does. So that was quite fun. Of course, with a parachute, it's even cooler to pull off that stunt. Kind of like a Red Bull stunt, it feels. Then I decided to find this curious stone and scan it with the scanning arm. Then later, I went with a pickaxe to hit it and take it back home. It didn't give me any science points, because I think I already did that in the second episode of this career speedrun. Either way, I did this cool Cobra maneuver, totally intentional. It was very well calculated there. And I went to explore now the oceanic part of Crescent Bay, the Crescent Bay biome. And I thought I could land on the ice, and I forgot the landing gear. This really got me fuming. I was so mad at myself at this point. So I gave up on the idea of landing on the ice sheets, and instead I went for sampling some science data out of Crescent Bay. My first landing attempt was atrocious. I decapitated the plane. I had to do better. So I still wanted to land unpowered so I could save some fuel for later, like Sully landing on the Hudson River with an aircraft full of passengers. The landing here was quite harsh, but I still managed to survive, so if it works, it's not stupid. Come on, guys. There is something important I want to mention. You can take an EVA standing on the porthole, like I'm doing now, and then you can do another EVA for any oceanic biome standing on the wing of your spacecraft, and it gives you even more science. On top of that, you can take a surface sample, which you can't if you're swimming, and play golf. This is ridiculous, honestly. I didn't even know these secrets until I played the game very recently, and I've been playing since like 2017. Either way, it was time for takeoff, and there's something I want to mention I failed to say earlier, and this is about the servo rotation mechanism that rotates the engines. Now this servo shakes a lot if you time warp, so it needs to be locked before a long flight. To do that, you need to stall the plane so there's no aerodynamic forces moving the position of the engines before you lock them. Once I did that, I was ready to collect more atmospheric science and embark on a journey, on a flight not to space this time, but to cross the sea. I was going for a different island, and one of the biggest islands on the planet. There was something there that I wanted to show you guys, but I'm not revealing yet what it is. Maybe some of you have an idea, but I don't think the majority of players know about this Easter egg. Either way, I wanted to set up a scientific camp there. So I flew across, I saw the island, and I used this small lake located beneath my aircraft at the moment as a visual marker. When I see this lake, it's time to descend, and when you've gathered a low altitude, it is time to turn around and aim for eastwards. Now in this game, you know you're aiming eastwards when you're above this lake. When you see Jool in the sky, Jool points eastwards because it never changes its position, because Laythe is tightly locked to Jool itself. Now at this point, something was appearing on the ground, and for those who know, that is the skeleton of the whale. And for those who don't, it's an Easter egg from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a really cool book that I haven't even read yet, but many people have recommended. So I guess I'll have to start reading now. Now at this particular location, I wanted to get a much more smooth landing than before. So I really paid attention this time. I wanted to get that nice landing, and I think I did a decent job. It wasn't very smooth, but surely better than my previous attempts. It was something I could be kind of proud of. And before starting with our ground operations, I decided to wait for the next morning, and I enjoyed the sunrise and sunset of this beautiful game that it's thanks to the modded community that it looks the way it is. So we began with our pilot Valentina. It was for her the honor of planting the flag in such an iconic location. And then we began with Bob, our scientist. It was time for him to deploy all of the equipment. And we begin with our antenna, followed by our seismometer to measure the vibrations of the earthquakes, and a lot of solar panels. It's important to feed with energy all these equipment because they're very power hungry. We have the mystery goo deployed, and then I made a big mistake where I was trying to swap between two different weather stations, I think, and one disappeared, and I lost it forever. And that could happen to you if you're not careful with your inventories. So no weather station for us, but we had some fun playing golf, which at this point is becoming like a tradition for every location that I go. I don't know, I just really like the animation, the way it looks. Either way, I discovered that we could place our equipment on top of the whale. And so this is where I put the central units of this entire station, to later realize that it was so far apart that I couldn't even communicate. So it's important to keep those equipment pretty close to each other, or they won't power themselves up. And it's time for takeoff. It's time to leave Laythe once and for all and return into space. I want to show you the uncut entire takeoff and ascension to space transition, just so that if you guys are interested, you can learn how this works with this particular model. Now, I was struggling a little bit initially at gaining speed, but I traded that lack of speed for climb initially. And with my afterburning jet engines, things changed immediately. I was very happy about their performance. Though we were running low on fuel, as you can see in the center left, that's the fuel available. But the advantage of this planet is that you can fly on jet engines at much higher altitudes. I was initially struggling with breaking the sound barrier. Perhaps I was doing that a bit too elevated, but nonetheless I eventually broke into about Mach 2, and yeah, as you can see, I was going up and up, much higher than I would on Kerbal with the Panther jets especially, which is an advantage because then we can ignite our nuclear engine, and the nuclear engine has less work to do relative to the jet engines, and that saves us a lot of delta V, a lot of extra mass for powering the nuke. Now, after about 35 kilometers, generally the jet engines will suffocate, so that's fine though, because we're really close to space at this point. Thanks to the nuclear rocket engine, I almost said jet engine, we are managing to get our way into space. I wasn't too happy with the performance of this Ascent. I thought it was gonna fail, honestly, but I guess the engine has just the right thrust to weight ratio, and even though I was overheating a little bit, it was totally fine. And eventually I managed to reach a apoapsis that would go above 50 kilometers, which is space above Laythe. And once I got there, it was only a matter of time till I circularized and got myself into a nice and stable orbit. My friends, it is now time to leave the Laythe and the Jool systems because our mission is almost over. But before that happens, we have something very important to do. That is our ejection burn. Ejection burns must be precise, and that's why I'm using the transfer window planner mod. I like it because it gives me visual cues and indicators for when and where exactly to perform a burn maneuver. Now, do I feel like using this mod is cheating? No. And that's because this mod only adds a degree of precision and fuel efficiency to my maneuvers. so it doesn't really break the game. It only makes it a little bit easier, and I think most of you guys will really appreciate when you try this mod out. Something to keep in mind here is that it gives us a burn reading of 1,600 meters per second of delta V. This reading is wrong, but in a good way, because in reality it's only 1,000 meters per second of delta V. Why is that? Well, it's because this mod fails to acknowledge that we're not orbiting Jool directly, but rather we orbit Laythe, which then orbits Jool. That orbital speed of us around Laythe gives us a kick, an extra boost of speed, which saves us 600 meters per second of delta V. I think that's quite amazing, because it applies for anyone, anytime that wants to leave Laythe and go back to Kerbal. So keep this in mind next time you have a spaceship and mission and you want to return home, because things are going to be a bit easier for you. Now, there's a mistake I made. I didn't keep in mind the docking port alignment. When I docked the airplane with the hyperring earlier, I didn't even check if the plane was facing exactly forward. Spoiler, it wasn't, and so my center of mass was a bit off the center. And for this reason, my trajectory ended up being quite different from the predicted one. So do not fear, I just had to do a couple of extra burns, mid-course adjustments, let's say. So with about 160 meters per second of delta V, I was able to bring my trajectory back, facing home, facing Kerbal. And finally, our Kerbals were seeing home in their sight. It was quite something that they were waiting for a long time. And now, the final phase of the mission was about to begin. I was approaching Kerbal at a dangerously high speed, and I knew well that the Mark I parts of the airplane were not going to survive this air brake maneuver. If I wanted to slow down enough without bouncing into deep space for eternity, I needed to air brake in a very intense way at lower altitudes, but this would burn me to death. And so, I had to compromise. I performed an air brake maneuver that wasn't low enough to burn me like a crisp, and did not manage to get me completely captured in Kerbal's field of gravity. However, it did slow me down enough that I could perform later when I re-ejected a small retrograde maneuver. I consumed all of the fuel left that I had, which wasn't ideal, but at least this time I was finally orbiting our home planet on a very highly elliptical orbit. Without any resources left, I sadly had to abandon the hyper ring. I wanted to park it in a low Kerbal orbit for future use, but this was out of the question. The priority was the safety of the crew and the safety of the airplane, so now I was aiming for the final re-entry air brake maneuver. And this would land me back at KSC. However, I miscalculated again the re-entry angle, and the airplane broke in several pieces, which was quite a disaster. On my second attempt, I was going with a slightly higher apoapsis, so that I would encounter the thicker layers of the atmosphere at first, and perhaps survive this re-entry maneuver. I was still overheating quite a lot. The science module and the cabin capsule at the front were overheating dangerously again. Those two were the most vulnerable parts of the whole vehicle, and I think if I had to improve this design, I would rebuild it with the Mark II parts instead. The Mark II parts are a bit heavier, but their heat tolerance is higher by about 400 Kelvin. That is very important, that makes a big difference. Also, they're heavier because they are lifting body elements, so with their shape, they create a lot more lift, which means I don't need to carry as many wing parts around to obtain the same flight dynamics. Here I was still very fast and was trying to burn that energy off by pitching up and down. Something exploded even, but I didn't care. The plane was in one bit, the astronauts were alive, and I really wanted to get this mission safe and sound to the ground. I was a bit too high, so I did this very high G pitch down maneuver. The Kerbals were just alright, I think at this point they're used to it, they don't care. And I was flying without any fuel. I didn't have any engines left. I was like a space shuttle. This was a one attempt only at landing back at the KSC. Landing gear out, and I did a few pitch maneuvers to burn the excessive residual energy. I switched to the cabin crew view, but I didn't really like that. I switched outside again because I wanted to check the landing, as my rear landing gear is a bit higher. And I destroyed the front wheel for some reason, but it was a landing that I could walk out of. And if you know, it's a good landing then. 12,207 science points were earned. I think this is a great success of a third mission. And this dictates the end of this crazy speedrun of doing the whole tech tree of KSP stock in just 3 flights. I didn't have enough money to buy the upgrade for the research and development, so I just got a random contract and used advanced credits from it to purchase that upgrade. And now I was finally able to purchase the final 2 levels of the tech tree of KSP. It was such a great moment, and I think this demonstrated the effectiveness of the hyperring in stock KSP. I hope you enjoyed the series, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you soon in another video. Peace.